Rewind back to 2006. Where were you? I was in my early 20s and I was in Australia and I was doing the kind of thing that made my parents a little nervous. I was driving around the country recruiting university students to spend their summers on eco volunteer projects, teaching kids in developing countries, saving sea turtles, that sort of thing. The organization was International Student Volunteers. Great people, great mission. Check them out. Well, here's what I remember from that trip aside from the wildlife, the politics. Australia in 2006 was, politically speaking, about as conservative as it gets on energy. John Howard was prime minister. Coal was not just king, it was the unquestioned, unchallengeable, built into the national identity king. The coal lobby, it didn't have a seat at the table, they had the whole table. Chairs, the building. Wow. Fast forward to today. South Australia, one state in that same country, is on track to hit 100% net renewable energy by 2027. Not 2040, 2027. And they've just tried it in law. 1 in 3 Australian homes has solar panels on the roof. They have the highest per capita solar installation rate on the planet. They just held a national referendum on nuclear power and voted it down by a landslide. Today, I want to dig into how that has happened, why it's so broken, and why Australia's transition is one of the most instructive blueprints available to anyone working in clean energy right now. A listener dropped a great comment after our California battery episode, laid out the framework I'm using today. The home battery program, Snowy 2.0, what all of it means for the grid. That comment is literally why this episode exists. So thank you. In May 2025, Australia held a federal election that was, in practical terms, a referendum on energy policy. On one side, you had the incumbent Labor government under Anthony Albanese, running on an 82% renewable energy target by 2030 and a $35 billion investment plan. On the other side, the Liberal National Coalition under Pete Dutton, running on a plan to overturn Australia's long-standing nuclear ban and build 13 gigawatts of nuclear capacity by 2051. Wow. Labor won in a landslide. The coalition didn't just lose, it got walloped. Energy Minister Chris Bowen said on election night in 2022, the Australian people voted to finally act on climate change. In 2025, they said, let's keep this thing going. Here is what made this election instructive. The nuclear debate was killed primarily on economic grounds. Labor's messaging wasn't about safety or environmental concerns. It was about cost. They argued a nuclear build-out would run something on the order of $600 billion. That number has been contested by nuclear advocates as inflated, and the argument was more political than engineering, but it worked because voters being killed by high electricity bills were not interested in a 30-year infrastructure promise. The lesson, and I've been saying this for years, is that clean energy transition, it wins on economics, math, and physics. Not on feelings, not on idealism, on math. The moment renewable energy became the cheaper option, the debate was over. It has just taken time for voters to catch up to what the market has already known, the reality of the situation. Now, let's talk about what happens when you win a decisive election and actually follow through. On July 1st, 2025, 2 months after the election, the Australian federal government launched the Cheaper Home Batteries program. The concept is very straightforward, a roughly 30% discount on the upfront cost of installing a home battery between 5 and 100 kilowatt hours, delivered through the existing small-scale renewable energy scheme. You don't apply and wait months for a check. The discount is applied at the point of sale. Your installer handles the paperwork. You just get a cheaper battery. The original budget was $2.3 billion and projected to run through 2030 and deliver over 1 million installations. Well, they blew through a significant portion of that in about 5 months. By December 2025, more than 160,000 systems had been installed with a combined capacity of 3.6 gigawatt hours. By March 2026, the government reported 250,000 installations. The uptake was so far ahead of projections that the government tripled the budget from $2.3 billion to $7.2 billion over the next 4 years. The new target, more than 2 million households with batteries by 2030, delivering around 40 gigawatt hours of distributed storage. Here's the context that makes those numbers super meaningful. Before this program launched, Australia already had the highest rooftop solar rate per capita in the world, over 4.3 million homes with panels, roughly 1 in 3 households, but only 1 in 40 had battery storage. All that solar generation, and most of it was being used immediately or exported to the grid for pennies. You're giving away the most valuable hours of your energy production. The battery program changes that equation, and it does so in a way that creates a distributed, resilient storage network across the entire country. Millions of battery systems acting as a giant, decentralized power source the grid can call on. They're building out virtual power plant infrastructure so battery owners get paid for contributing to the grid stability. That's a system. That's thinking. Before we get to Snowy 2.0, I want to go back to where the Australian grid-scale battery story really started, because it's one of my favorite stories in the entire history of this energy transition. In 2016, South Australia experienced a catastrophic statewide blackout. High winds, transmission lines down, the whole state went dark. It became a political crisis and a flashpoint for a national debate about whether renewables would run a modern grid. In 2017, Elon Musk had a Twitter exchange with Atlassian co-founder Mike Cannon-Brookes. Musk said he could fix South Australia's grid storage problem in 100 days or it'd be free. The government took him up on it. In November 2017, the Hornsdale Power Reserve came online. 100 megawatts, 129 megawatt hours of Tesla power pack storage, the largest lithium-ion battery in the world at the time. Critics mocked it immediately. They said it could only power South Australia for a few seconds. Technically right, but completely wrong about what it was designed to do. Hornsdale wasn't built to replace a coal plant. It was built to provide frequency control and ancillary services, FCAS, which is the system that keeps the grid running at a stable 50 hertz. Before Hornsdale, that market was controlled by a handful of gas generators who could charge whatever they wanted during those volatile moments, because they were the only ones fast enough to respond. When a generator trips or demand spikes, you need to respond in milliseconds. Well, even gas can't do that, but batteries can. When Hornsdale entered the FCAS market, the cost of those services in South Australia dropped by about 90%. Not 10%, not 30%, 90%. Independent analysts found that the battery delivered more than 150 million Australian dollars in savings in the first few years in a system that cost under $100 million to build. It's not a subsidy, that is a return on investment. In one incident, the battery prevented electricity prices from spiking more than 50 times over, stabilized at $270 per megawatt hour, when they were heading towards 11,500. When a storm disconnected South Australia from the national grid in 2019, Hornsdale held the lights on for 5 hours and saved consumers $14 million. Not one single event. The system has since been expanded and fitted with technology allowing to provide inertia to the grid, something that previously required a massive spinning turbines inside gas and coal plants to exist. It no longer did. Hornsdale is the proof of concept that made everything else in this episode possible. Without it, the debate about whether batteries could stabilize a high renewables grid would still be theoretical. It's not theoretical. It's been running since 2017, and the data is overwhelming. Now, for the other side of the ledger, because Australia's story is not all wins, and this one teaches something important about what happens when you confuse scale with strategy. Snowy 2.0 is a pumped hydro storage project in the snowy mountains of New South Wales. The concept is elegant. Connect 2 existing reservoirs at different elevations with tunnels. Pump water up one when you have excess power, release it downhill through turbines when you need it. It would add 2.2 gigawatts of capacity and a serious buffer of long-duration storage in the national grid. When announced in 2017, the project was projected to cost $2 billion and be completed in 4 years by 2021. Now, here's the actual completion timeline, and I want you to feel this. The original target was 2031, moved to 2023, 2025, 2026, 2027, now 2029. The current official target is December 2028. The 7th scheduled completion date of the project was supposed to be done 7 years ago. Who's running this thing? Trump? The cost trajectory is equally striking, from $2 billion to a revised $12 billion after 2023 reset. Analysis now estimate the total could reach $30 billion once you include financing, transmission infrastructure overruns, and in October 2025, Snowy Hydro announced yet another comprehensive reassessment. So complex, it would take 9 months just to complete the Akai. The lesson isn't that pumped hydro is bad. When Snowy 2.0 is finally complete, it will be generally valuable. Long-duration storage that can hold energy for days, not hours. The lesson is about sequencing. While the single project has been fighting geology underground, Australia, they installed 250,000 home batteries in less than a year. One project. Years late, potentially tens of billions over budget, the distributed network, 3.6 gigawatt hours of storage, deployed quietly across the country, one installation at a time, without a single tunnel boring machine. You need both, but the distributed army is what gets you there in the meantime. Betting your transition timeline on a single massive infrastructure project is fragile strategy. This is the part of the episode that I hope makes you angry and then makes you want to do something about it. A report released in late 2025 called Permit Power put hard numbers on a gap the industry has known about for years. In the United States, you know all about this. The median cost to install a 7 kilowatt residential solar system is around $28,000. In Australia, the same system costs roughly $4,000. In Germany, it's around $10,000. That's a 7-to-1 cost difference between the US and Australia for an identical product using the same solar panels, the same physics, 7 times more expensive in the US. The difference isn't hardware. Panel prices have converged globally. It's a global supply network. The difference is soft costs, permitting, inspection, interconnection fees, utility approval processes. In Australia, there's a standardized national framework. In the United States, requirements vary by municipality, by utility, by state. In some jurisdictions, you need multiple separate permits, electrical, structural, fire safety, from agencies that, well, they don't talk to each other. Some utilities take 6 months or more to approve a simple residential interconnection. And then they go ahead and charge you for that pleasure. Permit Power found that if the U.S. cut its permitting red tape to something approaching the Australian model, nearly 20 million more American families would install solar by 2040, representing 1.2 trillion with a T in lifetime bill savings. That's not a rounding error. That is a structural policy failure actively keeping people from cheaper energy. If you want the best deep dive content on real world installations and honest technical comparison, Australian and global perspective, check out Electrify This on YouTube. They deserve a bigger audience. So, what does all of this mean for your career? First, the Australian model is a blueprint that other markets are actively studying. The cheaper home battery program design, point of sale discount, delivered through an existing scheme, declining over time as prices fall, is exactly the policy architecture that advocates and legislators in the US, UK, Canada, and across Asia are looking at right now. If you understand how this program works mechanically, you have something to offer in any of these conversations. Policy literacy is a career asset. Second, the soft cost and permitting problem is a domestic U.S. opportunity hiding in plain sight. The companies building solar permitting software, streamlining interconnection applications, automating the paperwork that currently costs thousands of dollars per residential install, those companies, they need salespeople, project managers, operations staff, customer success professionals, people who understand both the technical side and the human side of getting solar installed. That skill set is in demand and it is buildable. Third, virtual power plants. Connecting home batteries into an aggregated grid asset, managing that dispatch, building the software and customer relationships that make VPPs work at scale. This category barely existed 5 years ago and is now attracting serious capital. Australia is ahead of the US on VPPs, which means the playbook was already written. The people who learn it now will be building the American version tomorrow. And if you're a burned out professional sitting on skills in software, sales, project management, or logistics, watching this and wondering whether there's a real career on the other side of the transition, spoiler, there is. The graduates that I've worked with came from bartending, fleet management, school administration, customer service. What they had in common was that they understood the problem and showed up, ready to learn the industry. That's still the entry point. So, if today's episode gave you the sense that this transition is real and accelerating, and you want to know specifically what it looks like in your city, your market, for your skill set, go ahead, book a free 30-minute industry analysis call with me. We'll map out the specific companies, the specific roles, the specific programs in your area. No pitch, no pressure, just 30 minutes of me pointing at real opportunities on a real map. The link is in the show notes. And if you are one of our apparently many Australian listeners who's lived this transition, got solar, got a battery, got perspective on what any of this actually feels like from the inside, please drop me a comment. I read them. That listener comment is why this episode exists. I'm Jason Vanzer. This is SolarPunkPro. The grid is going distributed whether or not the utilities like it. And that means the future belongs to the people who understand it. Let's get together and let's build something real.